And just leading up to that time, I was so anxious. I couldn't sleep at all. And then after it was over, I thought, oh, good, I'm going to be able to sleep. But I still couldn't sleep. And after, maybe about a month of insomnia, I fell into a depression after that.
Welcome to the Erasing Shame podcast. We are erasing shame about mental health by having honest talk for healthy living. We are so glad you can join us.
Welcome to this episode of Erasing Shame. This is our summer series about mental health. My name's Jeremiah Chuang. Today we're going to be talking about depression with Dr. Rie Mizuki, and she's from the AACCS. Could you tell us about your family background, personal background, and your professional expertise?
Okay. I was born in Tokyo, Japan, and then came over here to live when I was about 5 years old. And then we went back again when I was 13. So I've been educated both here in the U.S. and in Japan. I am bilingual Japanese speaking, so I do therapy in both English and Japanese. I'm a graduate of Fuller, and so I have a master's in theology and a PhD in clinical psychology. And I've been working here at ACCS for about 25 years, since 1993. I'm married and have 3 adult children and adorable grandson who's only 14 months. And did you say what kind of things, expertise? Or?
Yeah, what are your areas of interest?
My areas of interest, one big area of interest is depression, and then anxiety, which really goes alongside of that quite often. I work a lot with people who are in ministry. I've done ordination evaluations, psychological testing and things for people who are up for ordination, or pastors who are going through difficulties in the churches that they're at, to kind of evaluate and give them direction for next steps, working with missionaries, etc. And then just enjoy working with couples in relationship issues, and I really enjoy doing the integration of faith and psychology. So
That's really interesting. Could you give us some opening comments about depression and how to approach it professionally or and such?
All right. One of the things is that, I was trained, and, of course, when you're trained, you're learning about depression from a textbook. What I didn't expect is that I would go through my own depression, and a very severe depression, and I can't really even remember when the first episode I had was. It's just, it was after I finished getting my license, so I had already had my 3 kids by then, and it probably surrounded being very anxious, because I had kind of become, quote, the expert in the Japanese-speaking Christian community to do parenting and things like that. So I was called up to do a parenting talk up in the Oakland area, and they paid for my airfare and accommodations and everything. And just leading up to that time, I was so anxious. I couldn't sleep at all. And then after it was over, I thought, oh, good, I'm going to be able to sleep. But I still couldn't sleep. And after, maybe about a month of insomnia, I fell into a depression after that. And that one I kind of came out of on my own without any therapy or medication. But when I fell into the second depression, which was around the time that my youngest one was in first grade, I think, it was really difficult, and I decided at that point that I would go seek professional help. And I was helped by both medication and seeing a therapist. And so depression for me is not just something that I work with clients on, but something that I've experienced for myself. And that helps in having empathy for my clients and kind of sharing that experience with them. There have been times where, I'd say, I think medication could really help, and I'm on medication myself, and people would say, really? Or are you just saying that so I'll go and get, some medication? But I think it does help that I've experienced it myself. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Could you articulate what depression is exactly, and how does what are the theories and approaches, both counseling and medicine-wise, for how to deal with it?
Okay. Depression is a very common disorder, and it's a very treatable one, which is the wonderful thing, is that probably about 80% of people who do get depression and who seek help for it can be cured or can be helped, and so that's a real positive thing. One of the problems is even for someone like myself who's educated on it, it's not like having a heart disorder or something like that where you know for sure that this is something going on. And I think for myself it was like, okay, I'm not feeling well, I'm tired all the time, I don't feel very happy. One of the big things for me is that I lose a lot of weight because I lose my appetite. Eating is one of the things I usually enjoy, but I don't. I end up spending a lot of time sleeping and, have very low energy and have a lot of guilt and, negative self-talk, telling myself I'm a bad person, etc. And a lot of times there's feelings of wanting to kill yourself or, of at least wishing you were dead. And I think sometimes, especially as a Christian, you think, well, if I could just die and, go to be with Jesus, then it would be so much better than living through what it kind of feels like a living hell at that point. So I think that, that is one of those things. And then one of the things we're talking about is erasing shame. And sometimes, people don't understand that it's a medical problem. And so, there's this shame, like, what are people in my family going to think? Or am I going to bring shame to my family that there's someone who's depressed? Or there's all sorts of different issues that might contribute to people not seeking help. But it is a very treatable problem, treatable disorder, and medication really worked very well for me. The first time when I went to see the psychiatrist, he essentially said, you've had this before. We have 3 options. You can either tough it out like you did last time, or we could try some, homeopathic herbal types of remedies, or I could give you antidepressants, and I said, I want the hard stuff because it's been really hard. I had small children. I couldn't afford to be out on my back all this time. And so I received the medications, and probably within 6 weeks I was back to normal and feeling much better. And so that was a very positive thing for me.
Very cool. Has that experience, having gone through depression, does it help you apply your knowledge and your expertise when you're counseling and when you have your clients?
Yes, it does. But one thing that was interesting for me is that, I went to see a psychiatrist, and then I also went into therapy as well. But by the time I went into therapy, I was starting to feel a little bit better. And so I'm not sure so much if the therapy helped in terms of the depression or if it was helping me in other areas, of my life to kind of manage my life so that I wouldn't get into a place where I'd be overly stressed or anxious, to get into a situation that might trigger the depression again. What happened, one of the things that happened, though, is that I was feeling really good, and so I kind of started forgetting to take my medication, or in other words, I forgot, and then it was kind of like, oh, maybe I don't really need this because I'm feeling fine. But what happened was, after 6 weeks of not taking the medication, I just crashed and pretty much couldn't get up, and, was laying on the sofa every day, all day. And I had a cousin coming from Japan, and I was supposed to, take care of him all summer. And, it really was very bad because I had 4 young kids at home at that point because my cousin's the age of my kids, and was essentially like, sorry, can't help you, there's the cereal, there's the milk, just eat something. And the other really bad thing was I went back to my psychiatrist, and he put me back on that medication, but it ceased to work. So the medication that had been working well no longer worked, and it took another 8 months before we were able to find another medication that did work. So that was very, very difficult. So, that's really helped me to be able to talk to my clients about, if you are on medication, be sure you're monitored by a physician. Do not go off of it cold turkey. Do not, try to determine for yourself, whether, it's okay to go off. Always be, in conversation with the psychiatrist. So that was helpful. Now, most recently, a couple of years ago, I went through another depression, which lasted a couple of years. And this one, the interesting thing is that I was on my medication that I had been taking. I've been on the same medication since 2004. And because in the past it was always related to kind of a chemical imbalance, I just assumed this must be what it is again. So when I started not feeling well, I went to see my psychiatrist, and we started tweaking the medication and upping the dose or changing to a different medication or adding things and whatever. And what it turned out was that it wasn't a chemical thing this time, because I ended up back on the same dose of the same medication I started out with, but it was more spiritual, psychological issues. So this time therapy was the thing that really helped me out a lot. And so it had to do with my husband and I were preparing to go as missionaries to Japan, just kind of move there full time. And when I was 13, my family uprooted from being in the U.S. and went back to Japan. And I hadn't really adequately dealt with the trauma of that move. And so as the date approached for going to Japan, there were a lot of unconscious things that were going on that got triggered, and that led to this depression. But at the same time, there was all of this spiritual stuff going on where I'd be laying in bed and just Satan, uses scripture to tempt you to attack you, just like he did with Jesus in the wilderness. And, I'd essentially be laying there in bed, and all I could think of is, the parable of the talents. And, you're laying in bed doing nothing, and you're that wicked and lazy servant, and, you're going to be thrown out into the outer darkness. And starting to doubt whether I was really even saved, because I'm such a wicked person that I'm really not depressed. I'm just faking this, but I'm laying in bed, and it's because I don't want to do anything, and so I'm going to go to hell, and maybe I'm not really saved, and all of this stuff that was going on with me, and it wasn't until I realized that, okay, there were some traumas in my life that I hadn't been aware of. There was a good reason for me to be depressed, and if that was the case, it wasn't like I was just lazy and wicked. I'm depressed, and then that means that I can be healed. And it was pretty miraculous that after, I had been seeing my therapist for quite a while, but after one session, I pretty much felt much better and went home, and probably within a week I was, back to normal type of thing. So that was a very amazing experience. And my medication stayed the same. I was still back to the same doses, I had been before. But I received a lot of prayer during that time. It was support from my husband and my friends, my Christian community. They prayed for me. They accepted me. And I think I was very fortunate in the sense that I've never been silent about my depression. I haven't hidden it from people. If I would share that, and so people could be praying for me. I think it's unfortunate that in a lot of cases people are so ashamed that they can't really come out and say, they have depression. But when I have spoken about depression, given workshops, and shared my own experience, usually afterwards, people will come up to me and say, I've suffered with depression too, or, my mom had depression, or, I have a good friend who's depressed, what should I do? And so it's really out there. There was a funny situation once where my youngest son was taking private or semi-private swimming lessons, and the teacher who was teaching the lessons, as well as my friend whose son was taking the lesson with him, we all got to talking, and we found out that all three of us were on the same antidepressant medication. We're like, oh, you take that too, so do I. And so it was interesting how many people actually do deal with depression, but it's not something that we, talk about. But it's not something to be ashamed of. And it's something that you really can get help for.
You mentioned your therapist was really helpful during your longest period of depression.
Yes, yes.
What was some of the things that your therapist did that made the difference?
She was a Christian therapist. That really helped. And so she did pray for me, and she educated me a lot. It's funny because it's like they're all things that I knew, that I had studied, but when it's applied to your own life. And I think one of the things that she was talking about was, the subconscious and the unconscious, and how some of these memories that we have and the painful things in our lives could be really pushed down, into the unconscious, where you're really not aware of it until it starts creeping into the subconscious and into your consciousness. And I think for me, when I moved to Japan when I was 13, I knew that it was a pretty sudden move. It was something that hadn't been anticipated. But there were a lot of positive things that came out of it. I was there for 3.5 years. I was losing my Japanese abilities, at that time. My mom speaks very little English, although she's lived here in the States for 50 years or something like that. And so one of the concerns my dad had was that we would not be able to communicate with my mom anymore. So that was one of the big reasons for moving there. But after the fact, after I started, uncovering these things in therapy, I went to her and said, I heard that, Dad came back from a business trip in Chicago, and then, he decided that we were going to move back to Japan. So from that time where he made that decision to when we moved, how much time was there? And she said, he came back in February and we moved in March, and it was like, oh, I had no idea that it was like a 1-month period of time. And when I look back on it, it was like, okay, I was in 8th grade. I had really good friends. I was probably, at the top of my class academically. I had auditioned, for a part in The Sound of Music that we were doing, in the school musical, and it was a small role, but I had a part in it. And within a 1-month period of time, I was uprooted out of that and moved to Japan, where I was at the bottom of my class, and was pretty much trying to cram 6 years of elementary school into 5 months so that I could take an exam and get into middle school, type of thing. But I think all of that kind of got pushed down, with the but it's a good thing because, finally we're able to live near relatives that we'd never been able to be with when we were in the U.S. We were able to be there when my grandfather passed away, which wouldn't have happened if we had been in the U.S. And now I can read and write Japanese and, look at all the good that's come out of it. So I think as we were preparing to go to Japan, I hadn't really thought about, the trauma of it. And it's kind of funny because during that depression, there was a whole lot of apathy of, I don't care, it was, I'd be laying in bed, it's like, my kids are only going to remember me as this lazy mom who just laid in bed all day and didn't do anything. They're not going to remember how, I helped out in their classrooms or, held birthday parties for them or, whatever. This is the legacy I'm going to leave and I can't do anything about it and I don't care. It was, kind of the feeling that I had. But now I've kind of lost my train of thought. What was I thinking? In the midst of that, oh dear, I can't remember where I was going with this.
You're talking about uncovering your trauma.
Right.
Talking it through with your therapist.
Yes. Oh, okay. And so there was this real apathy, and so there would be times where, it's like, I'm not going to go to church today, and I'm not going to go to our Bible study today or whatever. And it would take so much energy to go to anything, and it would take so much energy to talk with people. because usually when I'm not depressed, I'm pretty social and I like meeting people and I like talking with them. And, it's like, we gotta go, we gotta get going. And it's like, oh, okay, well, because I want to talk to a lot of people after church and stuff. But when you're depressed, I don't want to go anywhere. I don't want to see anyone. It's all just energy sapping type of thing. So that particular Saturday morning, I had a therapy session and I didn't want to go. And yet, in this particular therapist's case, if you didn't cancel 48 hours before, you were going to get charged. So it was like, well, we're going to get charged anyways. So I said to my husband, why don't you go? Because I'm not going to go and we're going to get charged anyway, so you go. So I sent him to the therapy session, and it was there that she asked, can you think of anything, in her history, any kind of trauma she might have suffered or whatever. And then he said, well, I can't really think of anything except she moved around a lot when she was little. And the therapist said, oh, she never mentioned anything about that. Tell me a little bit more. And he said, well, when she was 13, the whole family picked up and moved back to Japan. And she was like, wow, that would be really traumatic. And, she's never mentioned that before. So the next session when I went in, she brought that up and said, your husband told me that you moved to Japan when you were 13. Can you tell me a little bit about that? That must have been traumatic. And, I was like, really? You think that would have been traumatic? And as I talked about it, I realized, yeah, it really was, quite traumatic. And when I think about it, if I go back and look at pictures of myself around that time, because according to my mom, this was a new piece I found out after, I talked to her after the therapy too. She said, yeah, your grandfather was like, oh, you guys, I thought you guys were going to stay in the U.S., but if you're coming back to Japan, we need to send the relatives who haven't gotten to go to the U.S. yet. And so in that last month that we were there, my uncle and aunt and cousin came over. And so we were going to SeaWorld, and because my parents lived in San Diego, Disneyland and all these things, but you see a very depressed 13-year-old at SeaWorld and at Disneyland, all these places that it's supposed to be fun, but, I look really depressed in these pictures. And it was all stuff that had never been processed before because I was not even aware of, how I had been feeling about that. I knew that it was hard. I knew that it was a big adjustment, but it was kind of like, oh, but, look at all the positive stuff that came out of it. And so I think my therapist was really very good at bringing out that trauma and showing me that, there were reasons for it, and it's okay, and I need to, try to start, even if I'm feeling depressed, just try to start doing little things that can help me to get energy, to try to exercise, to try to do one little thing a day where I don't feel so bad about not being able to do anything. And so after that session, I went home and, I said, well, maybe I'll start cleaning the bathroom or something. And so my husband and I started cleaning, and it was like, oh, I think I can maybe do this. And so after that, like every day I started doing little things, and then it also helped me in terms of, I had a certain identity in terms of, this is the kind of person I am, this is the kind of person I'm not. I used to always joke about, how I have such a black thumb that, if you go to a wedding and the centerpiece, goes to, some person, I said, oh, I can't take it home because the plant is saying, please don't send me home with her. She's going to kill me, that type of thing. And so I had this identity of I'm a plant killer, and it's like, okay, well, I've got to change this. So then I started going to the store and buying little bouquets of flowers and, trying to make the house look more beautiful and things that I'd never done before. But, just kind of trying to change my identity from, okay, I was really good at school, and and I'm a smart person, but I'm not domestic, and I don't do flowers, and things to, okay, all things are possible with God, and I can do those things. That might not be how I'm naturally made or gifted or whatever, but it doesn't mean I can't try them and do those things. So as I was doing those things, I started feeling better and better, and unfortunately got my appetite back, and so started gaining weight again. It was always that loss of appetite was the only good thing about the depression for me. But So probably gained like 30 pounds, from the time I was depressed. And but it was very, very helpful for me.
Wow, yeah. That's a lot. Thanks for telling us all about it. In closing, could you share some tips on how to get help or how to have hope for our audience?
Again, I think I've mentioned it a few times already, but that depression is very treatable. And, so if you can ask for help, get help, that the likelihood that you'll be able to feel better within 2 to 4 weeks is really good. One thing to remember about the medication is that it's not like a pill like aspirin that you take and your headache goes away. Antidepressants usually take at least a couple of weeks to take effect, and usually 4 to 6 weeks before you find the maximum benefit, and so it's not a quick fix, so you have to be patient. Therapy is really good to uncover some of the things that might have triggered your depression, but also to help you manage your lifestyle so that you aren't put in those situations where you might undergo the stress or whatever to fall back into a depression. So one of the things that has helped me is that I've been very careful in terms of my time management, so I don't see, for me to be depressed and to be seeing 20 depressed, clients would just really be a bad idea. And so I've always seen just a very small, number of clients, have a small caseload, and try to fill your life with things that you enjoy, that are life-giving, things that are refreshing and enjoyable for you. And it's not something to be ashamed of. People, if you're in a room of 4 people like this, here I am, at least one of you is likely to, experience depression at some point in your life. So you're not alone. So, and people really want to be there to help you. So to definitely reach out. And if you know a loved one who's going through depression, to try to get help for them. Sometimes what you find in depression is that the energy level is so low that they might not be able to make that phone call or, get themselves to that office. But if you can help them do that, they can really be helped. So.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mizuki. You shared really poignantly about your story with depression, and you also offered some great advice. And this concludes our episode of Erasing Shame, a summer series about mental health. Be sure to check us out and give us feedback on Facebook, YouTube, and iTunes. And the rest of our information is on our website at erasingshame.com.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Erasing Shame about mental health. Visit our website for all of our episodes at erasingshame.com. Please subscribe on iTunes or YouTube and like us on Facebook.